No, sir.
All right.
No, I don't have to stay, no, sir.
Let's bring jurors, please. Will be just a minute before we get started. Court reporter's rebooting her machine. Welcome back. I believe we're ready to proceed with further questions for Agent Gold. So if you'll have a seat, and ma'am, do you recognize you're still under oath?
Yes, I do.
Very good. Mr. Waller?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Agent Gold.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming back this morning, and we're going to just kind of do a little follow-up from where we finished off yesterday and go through a few more new things, and we'll be finished, okay?
Okay.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
Agent Gold, I'm going to show you what has been marked for identification purposes, State's Exhibit 218. If you will take a look at 219? 219, excuse me. If you will take a look at State's Exhibit number 219, you can tell me if you recognize what that box is.
This contains the dryer vent collected from the exterior of the building.
And I believe yesterday you mentioned to the jury that Agent Galloway was actually the person that processed the dryer vent there at the scene, but then on a later date, I believe in June, you did some examination of that same dryer vent. Is that correct, ma'am?
That's correct. I photographed it and packaged it at a later date.
And I believe yesterday you also said you did see the dryer vent there at the scene. And can you describe again for the members of the jury where the dryer vent was?
If you were looking at the building from the outside and that you're looking at the exterior deck, there was one on each side. There's a small little dryer vents that stick out from the building.
Do you recall which side of the balcony State's Exhibit 219 came off of?
I believe if you were looking at the deck, it would be on your right.
And do you recall if there were two different, on the other side of the balcony, if there was one dryer vent or two?
There were two to the left and one to the right.
All right. I'm going to ask if you will open State's Exhibit 219.
Yes. Do you have the scissors?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And again, on the boxes, they're the same identifying information that we've described earlier in terms of your name, the victim's name, and what this item in fact is.
Yes, it is. This is the same label as the other items.
And again, we spoke about the CCDI number yesterday. This is 13-33149.
That's correct.
And the bottom stairs apartment had a different case number.
That's correct.
If you look in 219. hand you a 219A sticker. If you'll place sticker number 219A on that object. And Agent Gold, do you recognize what 219A is at this point?
This is the dryer vent.
And at this point, when you see 219A in its present condition, is this the condition in which you saw it back when you processed it in June of 2013?
No, it is not. It has been flattened.
So when you photographed the dryer vent, it wasn't in the same condition as it is here today?
No, it wasn't.
Can you tell if some additional processing has been done to that dryer vent since you last saw it?
It looks like it has been used for a shoe print comparison.
Other than those,
It's been written on.
I'm sorry?
Someone has written here, item 19 on there.
Now, other than those changes, Agent Gold, any other changes to the object itself other than flattening it?
No, not that I see.
Your Honor, this time I would ask to publish the photographs that were introduced yesterday in regards to the dryer vent. You can put that back in there. You have those numbers.
Yes, sir.
It's 203, 204, and 205. State's exhibit number 203, do you recognize that photograph?
Yes, I do. That's the photograph I took in the lab of the dryer vent.
And you mentioned a moment ago that State's exhibit 219A is now flattened, but in 203 does it appear to be in the same condition in which it was when it was removed from the wall?
Yes, it does.
204? What does that appear to be?
That's a closer photograph of the dryer vent with the scale.
Yesterday you mentioned that this object was processed using the fingerprint powder. Again, this gray or darker area on the dryer vent, is that the processing or the powder that you've spoken about?
Yes, it is.
If we can go to 205, and what do you see there?
Another close photograph with the scale.
And in 203, 204, and 205, there appears to be some sort of impression there. Can you describe for the members of the jury what that impression is in terms of what you noticed in doing the processing?
That is a suspected partial shoe print.
And when an agent such as yourself finds a suspected shoe impression, as you've seen here in 203, 204, and 205, what do you do at CCBI to further that investigation?
As a crime scene investigator?
Yes, ma'am.
We will photograph it on scene, and as you can see, I also photographed it in the lab. It will then be submitted to our latent unit for a shoe print comparison.
Thank you, ma'am. Do you participate yourself in that comparison?
No, I do not.
And do you recall if only one dryer vent was taken off the wall there that day?
Yes.
So the only dryer vent that was taken off the wall is the one that was used for the shoe print comparison. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
You mentioned yesterday that in June, and I believe the second day in June, you were asked to photograph some clothing that had been recovered from Oxford. Is that right?
Yes, I was.
Agent Gold, what day do you recall it being that you photographed those items of evidence?
I believe that was in June. I can check the exact date. Say June 2nd or 16th, perhaps. I want to say it was June 16th. Yes, it was.
Okay. So in June 16th of 2013, you photographed some clothes. Is that right, ma'am?
That is correct.
And other than photographing those clothes, did you do any other type of visual examination of them?
Yes, sir. They were all photographed and visually examined.
I'm going to start with what has previously been identified It states exhibit number 56. I'll ask you to take a look at states exhibit 56 and tell me if you recognize what that is.
This is a Chicago Bulls hat, and it was, yes, it was the one collected from Oxford, top of dresser.
Okay. And can you tell from that information which Raleigh officer was the collecting officer?
Detective Morse.
And I'll ask that you open states exhibit 56 at this point. We hand you an evidence sticker for 56A. And do you recognize what 56A is?
This is the hat.
And what type of processing other than the visual examination did you do at that point, Agent Gold?
I just photographed and visually examined the hat. It was sent to the SBI for DNA evidence.
Other than any further processing that the SBI may have done, do you see any changes or alterations to that hat?
No, I do not.
Appear to be in the same or substantially same condition.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would have to ask to introduce State's Exhibit 56 and 56A.
Any objection? It's allowed.
Moving it back here.
Sure, you can leave it out on it, that's fine. I'm going to hand you what has previously been marked for identification purposes, State's Exhibit 53, and if you'll take a look at 53 and tell me what that bag represents that it is.
Black thermal shirt, Oxford, book bag in the bedroom.
And again, who collected that item?
Detective Morse.
I ask that you open State's Exhibit 53 at this time. Easier to go ahead and put two on.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand you a sticker for marked as 53A. If you can take a look at that object and tell us if you recognize what that is.
This is the black thermal shirt.
And other than, can you tell if there's been any further processing done on that shirt?
This was also sent to the SBI. This is their sticker right here for processing for DNA.
Other than that processing, any changes or alterations to that shirt?
No, there isn't.
And other than visually examining that shirt and photographing it, did you process that shirt in any other way?
No, I did not.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 53 and 53A.
Any objection? It's allowed.
I'm going to hand you what has previously been identified as State's Exhibit 52. If you can describe for us what the identifying information is on that bag.
This says a burgundy t-shirt, hibachi, Oxford bedroom, collected by Detective Morse.
And all these items, Agent Gold, I should have asked you, is there a date in which they were collected listed?
May 22nd,
Of
2013.
If you will open State's Exhibit 52. What is, oh, I'm sorry, did I hand you a sticker yet?
No.
I'm going to hand you 52A. What does 52A appear to be, ma'am?
This is the maroon shirt, and it says right there, Hibachi, Japan.
Other than, does it appear that there's been any further processing done on this shirt?
This was also processed by the SBI for DNA, and there's their sticker.
And other than the visual examination, the photographing the shirt that you've talked about, did you yourself process the shirt in any other way?
No, I did not.
Any changes or alterations to that shirt, ma'am?
No, there aren't.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 52 and 52A.
Any objection? They are allowed.
hand you 51, and if again you can identify that bag for us.
Black T-shirt from bedroom at Oxford, collected by Detective Morse.
And what date was it collected?
May 22nd, 2013.
If you can open State's Exhibit number 51. Or is that 51? Yes, I'm sorry. Hand you a sticker for 51A. Do you recognize what that object is?
This black shirt.
Okay. Can you visually examine that shirt and photograph that shirt, is that right?
Yes.
Other than that, can you tell if there's been any additional processing on the shirt?
This was also processed by the SBI, and there's their sticker.
And do they normally put the sticker in the collar line of a shirt, or?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
That's fine. Other than that processing sticker, any changes or alterations?
Not that I see.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 51 and 51A.
Any objection? It's allowed.
I'm going to hand you what has previously been marked as 55, if you will identify that bag for the members of the jury.
Burgundy shirt, Oxford bedroom, collected by Detective Morse on May 22nd.
And any changes or alterations to that bag, Agent Gold? Any alterations to that bag that you can see, other than it's been opened several
Yeah,
times?
just where it's been opened several times.
All right, if you will open State's Exhibit 55 for us. I'm going to hand you 55A sticker. And again, do you recognize that shirt?
This is a burgundy shirt.
And did you visually examine that shirt and photograph it?
Yes, I did.
And then was it sent to the SBI as well?
Yes, it was.
Other than
The sticker.
that SBI sticker, any changes or alterations?
No.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 55 and 55A.
Any objection? Allowed.
Is it okay if I put these on
Sure,
the floor?
that's fine. We're at, I know we're running out of room here. Finally, in regards to the clothing, State's Exhibit 54, can you identify State's Exhibit 54?
Burgundy shirt with white logo, Oxford bedroom, collected by Detective Morse on May 22nd, 2013.
And if you will open State's Exhibit number 54. And you 54A. What does that object appear to be, Agent Gold?
Burgundy shirt with a white logo.
And did you visually examine that shirt and photograph it?
Yes, I did.
And do you see any changes or alterations to that shirt?
It's a sticker from the SBI.
Other than that apparent processing, any changes or alterations?
No, there isn't.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 54 and 54A.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Allowed.
These objects that you've described to us, Agent Golden, here, I'll give you a minute to put that down. Thank you. these objects that you identified and described here, as part of your visual examination, are you looking for blood on the shirt or the hat or whatever the object is?
Yes, anything like that, or holes, anything that would need to be documented it further than just an overall photograph.
And in looking at these different articles of clothing that were brought to you, did you notice any blood or tears or holes in them?
No.
Thank you, ma'am. On June 16th, 2013, at the lab, that's the point in which you examined these articles of clothing. Is that right, ma'am?
Yes, it is.
Other than examining these articles of clothing, and I think you touched on this a little bit yesterday, but did you process some other items of evidence at that time?
There were also some items that belonged to the victim that were processed as well.
Okay, and we'll start with item 72. Can you tell us what CCBI item 72 was?
Tan and color checkbook.
And you said that was from the victim, is that correct, ma'am?
Yes, it is.
And was that given to you from the apartment?
Yes, I received it from Detective Brady, and I have here that it was collected from the apartment.
Okay. Tell us what type of processing you did on that checkbook.
It was visually examined and photographed, and there was a suspected blood stain, which was tested with the phenolphthalein with a positive reaction, and a swab was collected.
Item 73, what was CCBI item 73?
A white fossil brand checkbook case.
And what type of processing did you do to that checkbook?
That was also photographed and visually examined, and there was also a suspected blood stain on that, which was tested with phenolphthalein with a positive reaction, and a swab was collected.
And so again, when you say a positive reaction for blood on those two checkbooks, is that when you testified yesterday about a red blood sample will turn to purple or a different color? Is that what you were looking at there?
It is a presumptive test, and it will turn pink. Pink if there is suspected blood.
And specifically in regards to those checkbooks, do you know where in the department that they came from?
No, I don't.
Let's go to CCBI item 74. What was that?
A black in color checkbook case.
And how did you process that checkbook?
It was also photographed and visually examined. The suspected blood stain was observed, and it was tested with phenolphthalein with a positive reaction, and a swab was collected.
Item 75, and again, when I say item 75, I'm referring to CCBI.
It is a golden color wallet belonging to the victim.
How did you process that item?
It was photographed and visually examined with a suspected blood stain, which was tested with phenolphthalein with a positive reaction, and a swab was collected.
Item 76, that's the black and red tennis shoes that we've talked about earlier, is that correct?
Yes, it
And
is.
I believe you identified those yesterday. Items 77, 78, and 79, what CCBI items were those?
Those were buccal swabs collected from the three suspects.
And what did you do with those buccal swabs?
Nothing. I simply submitted them to SBI so that they could use them in their comparison and processing.
And you've mentioned that a couple times, Agent Gold, in terms of things that are submitted to SBI, whether it be these shirts or buccal swabs. What's the process for sending something from CCBI to SBI?
Essentially, there's a form that we fill out. It is then submitted to our evidence department along with the items that will be going to the SBI, and it is then taken to the SBI.
And why does CCBI have to send certain items to SBI?
The SBI is responsible for the DNA analysis and comparison. They do that there.
So to be clear, CCBI doesn't have an in-house DNA section?
Not at that time, they didn't. I don't know if they do now.
Item 80, that's the blue and black sneakers that we've discussed earlier.
Yes, it is.
Items 81 through 86 are the clothes that we just went through.
Yes, they are.
And item number 87 was the CCBI item 87 was the iPhone that we talked about yesterday.
That's correct.
And you said there was a test for blood stain on that, and it tested positive for blood.
Yes, it did.
Agent Gold, I'm going to kind of go now where we left off yesterday. We were talking about fingerprints. And do you recall obtaining latent fingerprints in this case?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And tell the members of the jury a little bit about how you went about getting latent fingerprints in this case and what areas of the house they came from.
We processed the exterior areas, the front entry door, the deck. We also processed in the breezeway. There was a stairway that led from the parking lot up to the second floor. We processed those stairway railings. There were 2 cars in the parking lot, one of which belonged to the victim. We processed the exterior of both vehicles. We did those first. And we also processed inside the house, all various areas in every room we processed.
And when you process fingerprints, as you kind of described yesterday, how do you go about collecting fingerprints?
It would be the same way as a cloth impression, with laying the tape over the developed print, lifting it, and putting it onto a card, similar to an index card.
And yesterday, when you were talking about the cloth impressions, you showed us that, for example, on the drawer, that you drew the drawer in the area in which that cloth impression would have come from. Is that the same sort of process you use when doing a fingerprint lift?
We do. We draw a small diagram on the back of the card.
Agent Gold, I'm going to hand you what has been marked for identification purposes, State's Exhibit 220. And if you'll take a look at 220 and tell me if you recognize what that item is.
This is a latent envelope containing latent cards 1 through 24.
Okay. What's the CCBI case number on those latent prints?
13-3149.
And when did you collect those prints?
These were collected on the 14th.
And the victim in the case, Melissa Huggins-Jones, is that name listed there as well?
Yes, it is. It has the same information as an evidence label.
The address, what address is listed?
Apartment 101, 441 Allister Drive.
And the agent that lifted these fingerprints?
Gold.
That's you?
Yes, it is.
And who's the officer listed?
Brady.
And what time, any other comments that are made on that evidence card?
It also has an item number, just like an item of evidence would, and this is item 21. And it also has our case number and the Raleigh case number.
You mentioned a moment ago that it has 24 lift cards in that envelope. What do you mean by 24 lift cards?
There are 24 individual index cards inside.
Okay. So in other words, those white index cards that we talked about yesterday, when you got a fingerprint from a certain location, you would put that on a lift card, and that is one latent lift.
That's correct.
Are there ever multiple latent lifts on one card, or do you try to have one card for one lift?
I try to have one card for one lift. I mean, sometimes one lift will have multiple fingerprints on it, though.
All right, I'm going to ask you if you'll remove one card from that.
Just one?
Just one, that'd be fine. We'll label this one as 220A. And as an example for the jury, there happens to be a blue sticky note on this one, but 220A, can you kind of describe for the members of the jury how you would go about getting that type of latent lift card?
How would I get the card itself?
Just in terms of how you would process it and how the tape is applied.
So essentially you develop the print on the surface. This is from the Honda that was parked in the parking lot, and it's from the exterior, it's from the exterior rear door. So you would process with powder the door, and then if you developed a print, you would take the piece of tape, lay it over the print, pull the tape off, and then lay it down on the card, and then this is the result.
And you mentioned yesterday that in the cloth impressions, one thing that led you to, the opinion that a certain lift was a cloth impression is because you didn't see ridge detail. On this example, 220A, do you in fact see the ridge detail that would lead you to believe it's a
This is actually not a very good fingerprint, so no, I don't. This is mostly just a smudge.
Okay. But in general, would you be able to see a ridge detail on that one?
Yes, you would.
When you would apply that. Okay, and State's Exhibit number 220, I believe you said it contains 24 latent cards such as this one?
Yes, it does.
Can you just briefly pull those cards out, flip through them, and make sure there's no obvious changes or alterations to them? And you just kind of can flip through them.
Well, you can see that they've been written on in marker, and that's from the latent examiner.
And what is a latent examiner, or how is a latent examiner different than what you do?
They do fingerprint comparisons, shoe print comparisons, tire track comparisons.
So your job is to get the latent evidence from the scene, then you pass it on to someone else.
That's correct. And then they do the actual comparison and submission to the database.
And if you can, and actually we'll do it this way, looking at State's Exhibit number 220, can you tell the members of the jury what type of latent evidence is that you obtained using those 24 cards?
What type of latent evidence?
Or the different locations, I guess I should say.
Oh, the different locations?
Yes, ma'am.
There are some from the Honda Accord in the parking lot. There are some from the Dodge Charger in the parking lot. The exterior front entry door. Interior of the front entry door frame. The stairway, so that exterior stairway which led through the breezeway, there are some from the right railing, there are some from the left railing. And on the deck of the actual apartment, there are some from the center railings, the top of that, and one from the interior deck railing on the left side.
So those were the different areas of the house and the apartment in general and the cards in which you received those latent cards.
Yes, it is.
And have you documented those different areas in your report?
Yes, well, these are all listed in my report.
And in examining those items, they appear to be in the same or substantially same condition as when you collected those latent prints.
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 220 into evidence.
Any objection? It's allowed.
And 220A, which was I guess the example that I used.
All right, they are allowed.
Now, Agent Gold, let's go to State's Exhibit 221. And the same process that we talked about earlier, State's Exhibit 221. Can you identify that for us, ma'am?
This is item 38, and these are latent lift cards 25 through 51, and they also have all the same information as the other envelope listed here.
And looking at State's Exhibit number 221, any changes or alterations that you see to that envelope?
Just notes from the latent examiners.
And is 221 already open?
No.
All right, if you can open that for us.
Let me take them.
Yes, ma'am, if you can remove the contents. All right. What do you see inside there?
These are the latent cards.
And then in your testimony a moment ago, you mentioned this was CCBI item 38.
Yes.
All right, and then are the lift cards given certain identifying marks themselves or information themselves?
Yes. So item 38 contains lift cards 25 through 51. So each card is given its own number.
And in flipping through those cards 25 through 51, does it appear that those cards have been processed as well in the manner in which that you described in State's Exhibit 220?
Yes, you can see in the purple marker where the latent examiners have made notes on the card.
Okay. And looking at one of those cards that you just pulled out there, does there appear to be a card that has a good example of ridge detail?
Here's one.
All right, I'm going to mark that one as 221A. And if you can kind of describe where that card would have come from, Agent Gold.
This is from the interior of the rear sliding glass door.
And going through, and again, how do you know that?
It's written back here. I've written interior rear sliding glass door. There's a small diagram with a little X, which is the location where the print was pulled from, the case number, the latent card number, the date, my name, and the type of case, in this case homicide.
And 221A and the rest of those cards, ma'am, other than the processing that appears to have been done, any changes or alterations?
No, there aren't.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce States Exhibit 221 and 221A.
Any objection? They're allowed.
And Your Honor, I'd also ask Agent Gold, permission for Agent Gold to step down and show 221A to the members of the jury.
All right, ma'am, if you'll just walk slowly with that exhibit visible as you walk back and forth in front of the jury. Please don't speak while you're walking in front of the jury. Yes, sir.
Agent Gold, yesterday, when we were talking about the fabric impressions, you identified States Exhibit 192A as a fabric impression card. Do you recall that, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And in looking at States Exhibit 192A, again, does that item missing the ridge detail that you described in, for example, 221A?
Yes, it is.
All right. Your Honor, if I may ask Agent Gold to step down again and show the difference in 35 to 35.
Yes.
Thank you, Agent Gold. Agent Gold, I'm going to show you now what has been marked as States Exhibit number 222. If you'll take a look at 222. Tell me what you see there. Actually, before you do that, let me back up. I'm sorry. 221, can you tell the members of the jury where lift cards 25 through 51 were taken from?
They were from the interior of the apartment. I believe there were master bathroom entry door, master bathroom closet, footboard, master bedroom entry door, the bathroom that corresponded with the child's bedroom. I believe there was one on that frame. They were all areas inside the residence.
How about we saw pictures yesterday of the bottles, the medicine bottles that were found there in the kitchen. Were latent cards taken from those medicine bottles as well?
Yes, there were. There were multiple taken from those, several.
Okay. Let's go to State's Exhibit number 222, which you have in your hand.
This is item 48, latent cards 52 and 53.
So only 2 latent cards in this one.
Yes.
Okay, and can you remove the contents of State's Exhibit number 52? Excuse me, 222.
It's really taped up.
I want to hand you 2 stickers, 220A and 220B. Since there's only two latent cards in that envelope, can you identify where they came from?
This one is from the exterior.
And when you say this one, is that 220A or 220B?
This is 222A, latent card 52. And this one is from the exterior of the AC unit closet door, which was inside the apartment on the wall. If you open the front entry door, it would be on the wall that would be behind that.
And 222B, excuse me.
This is latent card 53, and this is from the interior of the rear sliding glass door.
And we saw a photograph of that yesterday. I believe it had item 27 listed on it, which was a fabric impression. Was that the same general area in which this fingerprint would have been taken from?
Yes, it was.
Any changes or alterations to 222, 220A, or 222B?
Just the writing from the latent examiner.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce 222, 220A, 222A, and 222B.
Any objection?
No, sir.
They are allowed.
Those aren't all the way in. Yeah.
And finally, 223. Can you identify 223 for us?
This is item 55, latent cards 54 through 58. And these were taken from items that were processed in the lab.
Which items were those, Agent Gold, if you recall? Or need to refresh your memory
Yeah.
looking at your report?
The iTunes card, the Leah Sophia cardboard box, which was the blue one, I believe, and the broken window blind, and then the top bracket of the window blind where you saw all that powder yesterday.
And if you can remove the contents of 223. And do those appear to be latent print cards?
Yes, they are.
Okay, do they appear to have been processed at a later date by a latent examiner?
Yes, they were.
Other than that, other than those changes, any changes or alterations to those cards, ma'am?
No, there aren't.
Your Honor, this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 223 and its contents.
Any objection? It's allowed.
You can just put those back in. So to be clear, ma'am, State's Exhibit 220 is fingerprint cards 1 through 24 in just various areas of the house and outside the house.
1 through 24 are all outside.
Okay. And then 221 are fingerprint cards 25 through 51 inside the house.
Yes.
222 was the items that you described on the door and the AC unit.
Yes.
And then 223, those were fingerprint latent cards taken from different items that you processed later on.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, Agent Gold, you said that you're responsible for kind of obtaining these fingerprint cards. At any point, are you aware of the results of any comparison that another latent examiner may have done?
Sometimes, in this case, I don't know the results.
May I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes. Cross-examination, Ms. D.
Good morning, Ms. Agent Gold.
Good morning.
Okay. So yesterday was a little bit of a blur. There was a lot of evidence yesterday and a lot of things that you described doing. So I wanted to go back through some of that so that we would have a little bit of baseline to sort of refer to some of the processing that you did.
Okay.
So I wanted to just go through and talk about all the different types of processing or testing that you did either at the apartment or later at the lab that you talked about yesterday. So you did the LCV processing,
Yes, we did.
and that's the processing that turns things that kind of purplish shade,
Yes, it is. Leucocrystal violet.
leucocrystal violet, and that's sort of the name of the chemical.
Yes, we call it LCV for short.
And with that test, what's happening is that chemical is having a reaction to something, to something that's in the tested item.
It's having a reaction with the hemoglobin of the blood.
And I think you said yesterday that it's having the reaction to protein, like it'll react to other proteins as well.
No, I believe it's just a blood test, but it
Okay.
is called a protein dye, is what it's called.
A protein dye. And you mentioned yesterday that, for instance, the sheet sort of being generally sort of purple in the way that it appeared could have been because of sweat or other things that...
It could, and a lot of it is runoff as well. You know, because we spray it, and so there's an excess of liquid, so a lot of that could also just be the runoff
Okay.
on that particular item.
So sometimes yesterday you would clarify and say that it was a protein test, and sometimes that what it was testing for or reacting to was protein, and then other times that it would just be blood. So it is a protein that is present
Well,
in blood.
They call it a protein dye,
Okay.
but it reacts with the hemoglobin of blood.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't-
No,
wasn't
that's
clear.
okay. So that's the protein element.
Yes, I suppose that's what they're calling that.
Okay. And another type of testing that you did was the dusting for prints.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's what turns everything gray.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's a volcanic powder, some sort of...
Yes, ma'am. We use volcanic and magnetic powder.
Okay. And that powder, you talked about this a little bit this morning as well, but that powder will adhere to things that are like grime or sweat, all kinds of things on the surface.
Yes, it goes, the oils that the fingerprints leave behind, that's what it's adhering to in the fingerprint. Yes, ma'am.
And then when you put the tape down, it lifts up the pattern that's been left by that powder.
Yes.
And that will give an impression for fingerprints, as you've shown us here this morning, and it can also show other types of impressions.
Yes, ma'am.
And then you talked about a lot yesterday about presumptive blood testing, and that's the phenolphthalein test.
Yes, it is.
And I believe you mentioned this morning that's another instance where it's a chemical that has a reaction with something and therefore causes a color change.
Yes, ma'am.
And that color is pink.
Yes, it is.
And the jurors haven't seen any of that pink color, but you have talked about getting that pink result.
Yes.
And those samples then have to be sent elsewhere for confirmatory tests to be done.
Yes, ma'am.
And that, like the DNA testing, is done at the SBI.
Yes, ma'am.
And so when you talked about the various items, not in the bedroom so much, but in other places, as being blood, it was based on that presumptive result.
Yes, ma'am.
And then whatever testing happened at the SBI, do you have any knowledge of that?
No, I don't.
So then you did, as sort of I was following yesterday, you sort of broke down the types of swabbings you did into two types of swabbings. So I understood you to be saying that that the items that had the positive result with the phenolphthalein would be swabbed specifically to be sort of tested further for either a confirmatory test or DNA.
That's correct.
And then you did separate swabbings of areas where you thought you might find skin cells or sweat or something like that.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't think this term was used at all yesterday, but is that sometimes referred to as a touch DNA?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you did swabbings for both of those, and they sort of are processed differently based on the area that they're taken from and the reason that they're taken.
Processed differently by who?
By anyone that might do further testing on them in the future.
Yeah, I mean, SBI would test the touch DNA, and I don't know the process for that.
But they would sort of go with a different indicator. Like they would not go to them with the first type of swabbing where there had been the positive presumptive test. They would know that.
Yes, ma'am.
And so they would test it in whatever way they would test it with that knowledge.
Yes.
And then
I believe they also do their own presumptive test prior to testing. I think.
And they're going to testify.
Yeah.
So, but the others would go not with that background knowledge. They would go as touch DNA, and they would be processed in whatever way the SBI was going to process that.
Yes, it's labeled as such.
Okay, that's what I'm not saying very clearly. And then you did some testing with the blue light on the bedsheet, for instance, to see if there was any evidence of any sort of other assault, and there wasn't.
That's correct.
So was there any other type of testing that you talked about yesterday, either at the scene or in the lab?
I believe the only other one I mentioned was the super glue fuming, the cyanoacrylate.
Okay, and that's something you do in the lab?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's to harden things, I would think?
Well, in a way, yes, to fix a print, I guess is the best way to describe it, to an item, and then it's further processed once it's removed from the super glue. It's a chamber is what we call it.
Okay. So I've got just a few more questions about stuff yesterday, and then a few follow-up questions from your report, and you will be done with it.
Okay.
Mr. Waller asked you some questions yesterday about the distance from the headboard to the wall on the other end of the bed.
Yes, he did.
And you said you didn't really know that distance.
I do not.
But the distance between the footboard and that wall was quite a tight space.
It was, yes. I mean, I would say it was, can I guess? I mean, maybe approximately like that.
Right. Wide enough for a person to walk through, but not any wider.
Well, yeah, you could walk through. I mean, you could walk through carrying a laundry basket. I mean, I don't really know how else to describe that, sorry.
Well, you held up your hands, and it was a little over, now it's 18
guessing.
inches, 2 feet,
Yeah.
somewhere in
I mean,
there.
I'm guessing.
But you remember it as being a tight space.
Yes, I guess.
Okay. And towards the end of your yesterday, you were asked to look at some pictures of the deck area.
Yes, ma'am.
And my recollection is that whole section of questions was sort of described as now we're going to look at some pictures from the outside the deck processing. Correct?
I assume so, yes, yeah. The pictures with the blood stain and number 13, is that what you're referring to?
13 and 30, but what I wanted to clarify is that the pictures from the sliding glass door were also in that section.
I don't remember what section they were in.
Okay, but those were inside. The
Yes, I
processing
believe
that you
so.
did
I
of the
believe
sliding-
number 27, I believe that was inside. I would have to double check though.
And so there were two things from the inside. There was the fabric impression, and then there was the testing for prints.
Yes,
that
ma'am.
You said today were from a very similar location.
Yes, ma'am.
And your memory is that that was inside the apartment.
I believe so, yes.
And the deck was processed with the LVC.
LCV.
LCV?
No, ma'am. I believe that the blood swab at number 13 had a presumptive test done and a swab collected, and then we used a powder on the railings of the deck.
So that was, the only thing that was done outside was like a fingerprint powder.
Yes, ma'am.
But there was some processing done on that area.
Yes, ma'am.
And there was processing done on both sides.
All three sides of the railing.
Okay. And I think you were shown yesterday. May I approach her?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm showing you what was marked yesterday as States 183. Is that the area that you were sort of talking about with 13?
Yes, ma'am.
And is it your recollection that 30 was up at the top of that same railing?
It was, yes, somewhere on there.
And if, looking at this picture, if you were facing the apartment, this would be on the left-hand side, correct?
Yes.
And this is what that deck area looked like before the processing was done.
Before the fingerprint processing, I think so. Yes, it depends on if 13 has been collected or not, because 13 has been collected first. Yeah, I don't see any powder on the floor or on the railings.
And do you remember what this area looked like after the processing?
It would have had powder on it.
Yes.
If you saw some photos of that same area after the powder had been put down to take the latent lift, would that refresh your recollection about what that area looked like after? And I'm showing you what's been marked in Appendix 11 and 12.
Yes, it has gray powder on it.
And does that refresh your recollection of how that area looked at that time?
That's like that. Yes.
And is 12 a little bit of a close-up of 11?
Yes, ma'am.
Down closer to where the processing was done. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And was there something that also, another latent impression that became visible when you processed number 13?
Are you referring to this? Mm-hmm. Those are actually my boot prints in the powder.
Those are your boot prints?
Yes.
Okay. So you knew after you had done this that your boot prints...
Right, because the powder falls to the ground, and so as I'm walking around, then my boots are in it.
And you had a chance to review your report prior to today, correct?
Yes.
And did you include in your report any reference to the fact that the shoe print impressions on the deck would be your boots?
No.
Now, going back to the
CV.
I get it wrong every time. The LCV testing that was done on the deck area it wasn't LCV testing. It was just the latent powder, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So the latent powder was done on the deck. The latent powder was also done on the dryer vent
Yes, ma'am.
that you have testified about today.
Yes,
The dryer vent that if you're facing the building from the parking lot would be on the right.
that's correct.
And did you do that powder processing, or did Agent Galloway?
Agent Galloway processed the dryer vent.
Okay, and so I believe you've told us that when you got there, you were able to see one dryer vent on the right, right?
Yes,
And that there were two dryer vents on the left side.
yes,
And the dryer vent on the left side that's closer to the patio area is also obviously dented.
yes, ma'am.
And would any processing of that also have been by Agent Galloway?
Yes, it would have.
Because he's the person who came out with the ladder.
Right, he climbed that ladder.
Okay. So those both sides were handled by him.
Yes, ma'am.
But you do remember both sides having obvious dents on them when you arrived.
Yes, I do.
And you testified yesterday about the fact that a lot of this evidence sort of goes on to other people for further testing. Like basically you process the scene and try and give everyone as clean evidence as you can and the best evidence that you can from the scene, and then other people do other work on those various pieces of evidence.
Yes, ma'am.
And you mentioned several times yesterday that you're not a fiber expert,
That's correct.
and you didn't do any analysis of any of the impressions in this case, be they footwear, be they fabric, be they anything.
That's correct.
But you did say yesterday that there were some areas where the impressions that you collected had an obvious, I believe you said dot pattern.
Yes, when asked to describe the pattern, it looked like dots.
Okay. And there were other impressions that were developed that did not have that pattern.
I believe so.
Okay. But what you remember most strongly is that there were some that had the dots.
Yes, ma'am.
And beyond that, you don't have any strong memories in particular.
No, I don't examine them,
Right.
so.
And you mentioned that examining, you also have mentioned the word comparison several times. So a lot of latent testing is that, correct? It's a comparison of a known item to the sample that you have.
That's correct. That would really be better for the latent examiners to talk about.
Well, I just wanted to clarify because you had several times when talking about it called it a latent comparison.
Yes, that's what we call it when we request it.
Okay. Now, you want to talk about, just for a minute, about item, I believe it's 4?
The carpet?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So that was the section of carpet on which there was an apparent footwear impression when you arrived.
Yes, ma'am.
And it looked that as if that carpet had been recently vacuumed, and therefore the impression was, to your eye, you could clearly see that there was some sort of footwear impression there.
Yes, we thought it was a partial shoe print.
And you took some pictures of that,
Yes, ma'am.
and you cut out that section of carpet.
Yes, ma'am.
And you mentioned yesterday that you thought you had sprayed hairspray on it prior to cutting it out.
Yeah, we were trying to stiffen the fibers because we knew it was going to be difficult for that to really stay in the carpet. So it was just a long shot, really. So then we cut it out, and of course, the fibers went back to their normal locations.
Okay. And again, when you had your chance to sort of review your report prior to today, did you make any reference in the report to using the hardening agent?
The hairspray?
Yeah.
No.
And I believe you said yesterday that the carpet sort of went back to its non-impression state in the process of transport back to the lab.
Yes,
The impression
that's the best
disappeared.
way I can describe it, yes.
And you also you have all different sizes of obviously evidence that's collected at a scene, and I believe the piece of evidence that item 4 was in was referred to yesterday, and it's a gun box.
Yes, ma'am.
And I believe you told us yesterday that you chose it because it was a good size for the carpet.
Yes, ma'am.
But number 4 is actually folded inside that box.
Yes, it is, after the print was already gone.
Okay. So
So it would have gone back flat in a brown bag, and then once I got back to the lab, I could put it, you know, and see that it was gone, and it was then able to be put into a box.
So it wasn't packed in its permanent evidence container at the scene?
No, ma'am, because it had to go back to the lab for further analysis.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there was some mud on, or suspected mud, I believe, on both a pillowcase and maybe also a blanket or a sheet. I remember it specifically on the pillow that did not have a case.
Yes, ma'am.
And I do not, off the top of my head, remember which item number that was, but I do remember you telling us that and showing us that.
Yes, ma'am.
And you also had a chance yesterday to look at and admit the shoes that were brought to you after they were collected from both of these individuals.
Yes, ma'am.
And on the blue and black shoes, there is what appears to be some mud.
I don't know, ma'am.
You don't remember that from
I don't
yesterday?
recall seeing mud.
And you don't remember, do you remember in the pictures you looked at yesterday? May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Ma'am, I'm showing you what, it's 210. What you looked at yesterday and was labeled as State's Exhibit 210 through 214.
Yes.
Does that appear to be the blue and black shoes?
Yes, ma'am.
And if you look through those, both in the treads and
Yes.
somewhat on the sides of
Right here.
the right shoe, do you see that there was, when you processed them, some mud on them as well?
There is some dirt inside the tread. Yes.
All right. And it's hard to see, but do you remember any of it also appearing on the shoes that you can see vaguely in those pictures?
Not in a significant amount.
Okay.
No.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Gold, in kind of summary, it appears that you collected 6 different fabric impressions. Is that correct, ma'am?
That sounds about right,
Okay.
yes.
I had a CCBI item 46 from the bedpost, CCBI 27 from a door frame, CCBI 30 from the deck rail, CCBI 35 and from the deck rail as well, item 53 from the jewelry drawer, and item 54 from the Victoria's Secret box. Does that
Yes.
sound like a summary of the
It
ones
does.
that we've talked about over the last couple days? Sometimes you did a swab from those items, and sometimes you did the lift card. Can you kind of tell us why you would have done different things with those different fabric impressions?
The reason we did the swabs is because we were hoping that with a cloth glove, the suspect had sweated through the glove, leaving some sweat behind, and we were hoping to obtain their DNA that way.
And once you do the swab, does it distort it from being able to do the?
If it's a small print, it can, yes.
So is that the reason why if you do the swab first, you don't do the lift print? The lift that we've talked about here already.
Yes.
Okay. In those 6 different cloth impressions, though, regardless of whether it was a lift or a photograph, did it appear that there were different patterns in those 6 different lift cards?
I would have to look at them to say for certain, but what sticks in my mind is the dot pattern that we kept seeing.
But were the dot patterns in every one of those fabric
I
impressions?
don't believe so, no.
And you processed all 3 sides of that deck rail?
Yes, sir.
And I think in response to Ms. D's question, you did say that some had dots and some did not regarding the fabric impressions.
Yes, sir.
Almost forgot our big diagram. If I may ask Agent Gold to step down.
Yes.
You mentioned the floor plan of the apartment yesterday. And prior to stepping down, let me make sure you recognize this, Agent Gold. Will you take a look at State's Exhibit 224 and tell us what that is?
That is the blueprint of the apartment.
Okay.
The diagram, yes, the floor plan.
And when you say the apartment, are you talking about the upstairs one?
Yes, the incident location for the homicide.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 224 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Okay.
It's allowed for illustrative purposes.
And to be clear, and you mentioned this yesterday, I think, Agent Gold, in some of your testimony, but 224, does it appear to be kind of a reverse floor plan of that apartment?
Yes, it is. This floor plan was given to us by the leasing company, and it is the floor plan of the model of the apartment where the homicide occurred, except that it's a mirror image. So, for instance, this should just simply be flipped. It's just opposite.
Okay. And so this area illustrates the apartment in which you did the processing, except for the master bedroom would be on this side of the apartment and the regular bedroom would be on this side.
That's correct. And just like the door would be on that side. Just everything is opposite.
Thank you, Agent Gold.
Anything further, Mr. Waller?
No, Your Honor. Thank you, sir.
Any recross?
Just one question of clarification. So those models of the apartment that the jury's seeing now and they may have seen earlier, it's not just that the rooms are switched, the whole orientation is switched.
Right, it's a mirror image.
Right, so
Yes.
if you're looking at that, the entrance is on the right.
Right,
And so the jurors need to imagine walking in from the left of the picture.
exactly.
And then the master bedroom would still be across from them.
That's correct.
All right. Anything further? No. All right, ma'am, you may step down.
Thank you.
Further evidence for the state?
Your Honor, if we could be heard briefly outside the presence.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and take a mid-morning recess then, and I'll ask you to return to the deliberation room at 5 minutes past 11. Recall all the rules. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about the case. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation. No conversation with party witnesses or lawyers. Leave your notepads. 5 past 11. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Waller.
Your Honor, and this is something that's kind of been brought up already, and I would submit to Your Honor at this point with the photograph that was approached and talked to that agent about that was not in evidence on behalf of the state, and there were some specific questions regarding a footprint. I think we're at the point where the defense has offered evidence in regards to that photograph, and there's been some talk of it yesterday in terms of or 2 days ago in terms of a cautionary instruction or in regards to a similar issue. But when you go up there and you start talking about, is this not a footprint that you see in this photograph, I think we've crossed a line.
Well, I'm not going to address that because it remains to be seen what the defense will do with respect to evidence in this case. So I'm not going to address that issue now. We can certainly take it up when the time comes.
And I just wanted to kind of do it for the record at this point, and it was
Yes.
defense 11 and 12 would be the issue in case I forget later on.
Yes, sir. It's noted for the record. All right. At some point, is there a witness who will be called who, by prior court order, will be identified by initials only? Is that our next witness?
It is not our next
All
witness.
right.
I don't anticipate that she will testify until after lunch, so we can address that.
All right, and if you'll just think about what instructions you'd want me to
I
give
will.
the jury on that.
Sure.
All right, very good. Then we'll be in recess until 5 past.
Superior Court stands